Early morning in April. Indiana, the mist hung light as breath across the cornfields, still wet with night dew. The air was cold even as the sun began to peek through the soft pink clouds. A narrow dirt path wound through the village, leading from a row of old wooden houses to the high school on the edge of town. No one remembered exactly where the road began, but to Lucas, it was the hallway of his life. Lucas Walker, 12 years old, walked slowly along that path every morning. In one hand, he carried a moss-colored backpack frayed at the straps, sewn back together, with green thread like a patchwork of memories. He wore cracked rubber sandals, the slap-slap sound of his steps blending with the rustle of wind, pushing dry leaves across the ground. On the village's edge, the gray wooden rooftops stood silently, like elderly witnesses of time. Sparrows perched on power lines chirped as if waking the world. A light breeze carried the smell of damp earth and fresh grass into his nose. And in that quiet, Lucas breathed slowly and deeply, as if holding on to the one moment in the day when he could truly be himself. Beside that road stood the wooden house where he lived with his grandmother, Mary Walker. The house had only a living room, a small bedroom, and a kitchen. Everything was old. A battery-powered radio, a creaky fireplace, a few wool blankets she had knitted 10 years ago. But it was clean and tidy. It was a small world the two of them leaned on to survive. Grandma Mary was a frail woman with snow-white hair, but eyes that shone with love. She lived off elderly support benefits while Lucas received free lunch assistance at school. They weren't poor to the point of eating watery porridge every day, but they certainly had no extras. On birthdays, instead of cake or gifts, she would make a peanut butter sandwich, wrap it in newspaper, and draw a heart on it. Lucas never complained. In his heart, the world was enough. Or maybe he had gotten used to not dreaming too big. He was quiet, never loud, but his eyes always looked far away. He loved the silence, loved the early mornings sitting on the porch, listening to the wind blow across the tiles. And most of all, he loved running. Each day before school, Lucas would leave earlier than his classmates to steal a few brief moments running down the dirt road. He would drop his backpack and run, not for anyone, not for anything, just to feel like he was flying. One time, Grandma Mary saw and asked, "Who do you want to become when you grow up?" Lucas gave a small smile and answered with a voice hoarse from the cold, "Maybe the fastest boy in town, Grandma." But inside that dream was not small. It was everything: a quiet flame burning in their cold house, in the sighs she let out when the gas bill came and the benefits hadn't arrived yet. At school, Lucas was smart, but no one noticed. He sat in the back row, far from the noisy kids. When the gym teacher asked if anyone wanted to join the track team, Lucas raised his hand, but the teacher just looked at his old sandals and gave a polite chuckle. "Got any sneakers? Walker. Running in flip-flops won't cut it." The whole class laughed. Lucas just pressed his lips together and said nothing. He understood sports required more than passion. It required opportunity, and he lacked almost everything. But every afternoon, after finishing his homework and helping Grandma water the garden, Lucas ran again. No one taught him, no one cheered. Only the fields knew. He ran along the edges of the crops, past the wooden gate around the old oak tree where his grandfather once sat fishing. Each step was a silent promise to himself. One time, Grandma asked, "Why do you keep running, Lucas?" He answered firmly, "Because when I run, I don't feel poor. I feel free." Those words made Grandma Mary fall silent for a long time. She turned away, picked up her teacup, and stared out at the sky, once a place she believed no longer held any miracles. Then one night, it rained hard. The roof leaked right beside Lucas's bed. Grandma Mary scurried to place a pot under the drip, while Lucas sat hugging his knees, listening to the steady plop-plop of water hitting the bottom. He looked up at the ceiling, then turned to the soaked sandals by the door. "Grandma," whispered. If I had good shoes, I'd run really fast. Where would you run to? Lucas paused for a moment and then replied, I'd run to a place where people see me for who I am, not for the broken sandals I wear. She didn't say anything. She just pulled the blanket up to his chest and sat beside him holding his hand. The next morning, when the rain had eased and dew still clung to the blades of grass, Lucas headed to school. Same old sandals, same old path. But inside him, something had changed. At the familiar turn where red maple leaves scattered thick on the ground, he stopped. At the edge of the road, there was something, a pair of shoes. Running shoes covered in mud, but clearly high quality. Gray silver with faint reflective stripes and soles still in good shape. Lucas bent down and touched them. Soft, light, breathable, just like the ones he had stared at through the sports store window, never daring to go inside. He looked around. No one. On the quiet village road, only the wind and his pounding heart. The shoes fit perfectly, as if they were made for him. And for the first time, a strange feeling rose inside him. Not quite joy, not quite guilt. It was hope tinged with a sense of unworthiness. He stood still for a long time, then removed the shoes, cradled them in his arms, and turned back toward home. In his mind echoed something Grandma once said. There's no road longer than the road of honesty, but it always takes you somewhere worthy. And it was in that very moment, when Lucas placed the shoes on his old wooden shelf and wiped the dried mud with a damp cloth, that a miraculous journey began. A journey he had no idea would take him farther than he ever dreamed. Lucas sat on the old wooden floor of his house, the shoes laid before him like a treasure. The room was dimly lit by a faint stream of light passing through a coarse fabric curtain. Outside, the sky remained gray raindrops, still clinging to the edge of the narrow eaves, occasionally falling with a soft drip into a water-catching basin. He used an old rag once, part of a table cleaning cloth, Grandma Mary often used to gently wipe every detail of the shoes. Beneath the thin layer of dirt, the silver gray shimmered with a steel-like gleam. A faded orange stripe ran along the side like a slash of energy. On the sole, the Nike logo was still clearly visible, a brand he had only ever admired through the sporting goods store window in town. There were no marks on the shoes, no name, no note, only a worn spot on the heel and a small tear on the right edge, signs of time and motion. He tried them on. A perfect fit. As if the shoes had been waiting all their life to be worn by him. But Lucas took them off again, placing them neatly on the shelf. A flood of questions and guilt surged through his mind. Did someone drop them? Is someone looking for them? Or were they discarded? Can I keep them? If I do, is it stealing? He knew the feeling of loss well when the little he had was taken away. And he didn't want anyone else to feel that way. That afternoon, when Grandma Mary came back from the local market with a bag of potatoes and a few small apples, Lucas ran to help her. On the way, he gathered all his courage to tell her about the shoes. Grandma Mary was silent for a long time, then gently placed a hand on his shoulder. You did right by bringing them home. But keeping them without trying to find the owner, that would be wrong. What's truly yours will return to you no matter how long it takes. Lucas nodded, feeling a weight lift from his chest. He made a decision if no one came to claim them. By the end of the week, he would give the shoes to someone else who needed them, just as he had. That evening, Lucas wrote a note on a page from an old school notebook, found pair of running shoes. I found a pair of running shoes near the red maple tree by the village road on Monday. If you lost them, please come to Mary Walker's house, 47 Village Road. Describe the shoes to claim them. He taped the note to the utility pole across from the bus stop. The white paper fluttered in the wind, carrying Lucas's faint, hopeful wish. 3 days passed. No one came. No one knocked on the door. Not a single person asked about the shoes. Lucas still went to school, still quietly crossed the fields. But something inside him waited. Every time he passed the wooden shelf, he glanced at the shoes, still there, silent, clean, as if they too were waiting to come alive again. He wanted so badly to try them. Just once. Just to run a few steps. But each time he reached to take off his sandals, he stopped himself. The honesty his grandma taught him pulled him back like a string, reminding him that kindness is what takes you farther in life. Friday evening, while Grandma Mary was knitting under the soft yellow light, Lucas gently asked if no one comes, can I keep them? She looked up deep into his eyes and nodded slowly. If you've given them a chance and you've been honest, then heaven will understand. That night, Lucas placed the shoes in a cloth bag beside his bed. But he still didn't wear them. He waited because deep down, he knew something was still unfinished. Sunday morning. A knock on the door came at 7:30 a.m. Lucas was still in his pajamas, his eyes barely open. Grandma Mary, making tea, went to open the door. Standing outside was a tall, lean man in a faded khaki jacket and a cap pulled low over his face. He looked to be in his 60s, with tired, pale gray eyes that still held a sharpness. He looked at Grandma Mary, then at Lucas standing behind her. I saw the note about the shoes. Lucas stepped forward, nervous. Can you describe them, the color, any special markings? The man answered slowly, silver gray Nikes, orange trim. The soles a little worn at the right heel, small tear on the right edge. I had them in a shopping bag walking back from the market, must have dropped them near the red maple tree. Lucas's heart clenched. Exactly right. He turned, opened the bag, pulled the shoes out, and handed them over. The man took them, cradling them, like reuniting with an old friend. He didn't put them on right away, he just looked at them for a long time. I almost threw them away, he murmured. But I couldn't. They've taken me through a lot. Lucas gave a small nod. He understood. More than anyone, he knew how an ordinary object could carry memory and identity. I found them when I needed them most, Lucas whispered. But I knew they weren't mine. The man looked at him for a long moment. In that gaze was understanding and regret. What's your name? Lucas Walker, sir. Thank you, Lucas. Not many people would have done this. He turned to go, then paused as if remembering something. Do you like to run? Lucas looked up, surprised. I love running, a lot, but I don't have shoes. The man gave a quiet nod. He removed his cap. Only now did Lucas see silver hair, sunken cheeks, but eyes still bright and sharp like someone who had weathered many storms. Beneath his faded jacket, he wore an old T-shirt with the logo, Indiana Runners Club. The man held out his hand, Thomas Deacon. Used to be an athlete. Now, just an old man who walks country roads. Lucas shook his hand. It was rough, warm, a strange feeling like touching a piece of forgotten history that somehow belonged to him. If you still want to run, the man said, come to my house this afternoon, near the edge of the forest, the red brick house with the torn flag on the porch. Lucas blinked. What for? Just come. Bring the shoes. We'll begin something. When Mr. Thomas left, Lucas stood there for a long time. He didn't understand what had just happened, but something inside him stirred. Not just happiness. It was a spark shimmering, promising something greater. Like he had just opened the first door to a secret house he had dreamed of his whole life. That afternoon, Lucas tied the laces tight and began walking toward the red brick house at the forest's edge. The red brick house stood at the edge of the village, where the dirt road turned into a gravel path leading into a sparse pine forest. Lucas had never walked this far before. To him, the village's edge was the border between what was known and what he had never dared to explore, between safety and the strange unknown. But today, with the silver shoes in his bag, he crossed that line. The house looked exactly as Mr. Thomas had described, small dark red tiles on the roof and an old faded American flag fluttering on the porch. The grass around the yard was tall, but not wild. There was something about the place, broken but not decayed, much like its owner. Lucas climbed the steps. The wooden door was ajar, as if it had been waiting for him. "You made it, huh?" Thomas's voice came from inside, deep and raspy, like old wood after rain. Lucas stepped in, still clutching the cloth bag. Inside was a world wrapped in silence. No TV, no radio, just a worn-out armchair, a low bookshelf with a few books on sports and physical therapy, a dusty guitar in the corner, and on the wall, dozens of picture frames, neatly hung. Lucas moved closer. The photos started in black and white, shifting to the grainy tones of the 90s, a young, strong man running in a roaring stadium. Another holding a metal tears gleaming in his eyes. And one photo that made Lucas freeze, a young Thomas standing beside a banner, Olympic Trials. Athlete of the Year, Thomas Deacon. "I didn't think," Lucas whispered, almost in disbelief. "I didn't think you were a legend." Thomas stepped out from the kitchen holding 2 glasses of water. "A good runner, not a legend. Legends don't disappear after one fall." He placed a glass in front of Lucas, his eyes not sad but deep, as if remembering someone who had died long ago. They sat in silence for a few minutes. Lucas took a sip, glancing at the shoes still inside the bag. "You're really going to teach me how to run?" "If you're willing to run," Thomas replied simply. Lucas nodded. He didn't need to ask more, because he knew what was happening now, strange as a dream, was a chance life rarely gave. The first day began in a clearing behind the house. No track, no chalk lines, just weeds and dry soil. But to Lucas, it felt like a stadium. "Put your shoes on," Thomas said, arms crossed, standing in the golden afternoon sun. Lucas hesitated, then opened the bag. As he slipped on the silver shoes for the first time, he felt like he was putting on his own kind of armor, not flashy, but right. As right as breathing, as right as his heartbeat. He stood up, feeling the cushion beneath his feet lift him like wings. "Have you ever run before?" "Yes. But no one taught me." "Good. That means no one's ruined it yet." That sentence surprised Lucas. Thomas began the first training session with a simple instruction jog around the yard. "Don't worry about speed. Just be real." Lucas ran. The wind blew through his hair, dust swirled beneath his heels. Thomas watched, not with a stopwatch, not taking notes, just watched. His gaze wasn't that of a coach. It was someone searching for something lost. 3 weeks passed. Lucas came every afternoon after school. The first day was just getting familiar. The second, learning to breathe deeply through the nose, not the mouth. The third, learning to land mid-foot. On the fourth, Thomas tied sandbags to Lucas's ankles and had him walk for hours. "You run like a panicked baby deer," Thomas said when Lucas tripped. "Then how should I run?" Lucas grumbled. "Like you believe every step leads to something bigger." Lucas didn't understand right away, but he listened, and he followed. One afternoon, rain poured down. Lucas still showed up. Soaked to the bone, silver shoes splattered with mud. Thomas didn't let him into the house. "Run." "But it's raining, sir. Your opponents won't wait for sunshine." Lucas ran. Rain slapped his face, mud clung to his knees. He slipped, fell, got back up. His eyes stung. He didn't know if it was the rain or Thomas being too harsh. But for the first time, he didn't feel cold. That night after training, Thomas poured him a cup of hot cocoa, something Lucas had never tasted. They sat on the porch steps, watching rain fall from the eaves. "Do you regret the past?" Lucas asked. "I do. But more than that, I regret not sharing it with anyone," Thomas replied. And then he began to tell his story. A story no one had heard before, not the papers, not the fans, just for a boy in plastic sandals with a brave heart. Thomas was once Indiana's top athlete, full scholarship, broke state records, selected for the national team for the 1996 Olympic trials. But in the semifinals, while leading, he felt a sharp pull in his hamstring. His coach, pressured by sponsors and pride, told him to keep running. "Run. Don't stop. You're all we've got," the coach had said. Thomas kept running, and then he fell, tore his ACL. Career shattered. Friends left. Sponsors disappeared. The media labeled him a fading star. Then came years of depression, anger, and running away from the world. "I lost everything." But the worst part, Thomas turned to Lucas, was losing the passion. "I once loved running like you do, but I let others use it for money, for control. When I fell, I thought running had betrayed me." Lucas sat quietly, eyes on the water trail flowing past his feet. "And now I know running never betrayed me. I just didn't understand it." That night, walking home, Lucas felt warmth in his chest. Not from the cocoa, but from something deeper. He wasn't just learning to run. He was learning to face fear and himself. One late May afternoon, Thomas handed Lucas a colored flyer. It was the town's annual running event announcement for kids under 14. Not a big event, but official, with uniforms, spectators, and medals. "Are you ready?" Thomas asked. Lucas tightened the laces on his silver shoes and nodded. "I don't have to win. I know. You just have to run true." Thomas smiled. The first real smile Lucas had seen on him, not forced, not hidden, but sunlight after a long winter. From the shadows of the past, a man had stepped out, and through an old pair of shoes, he found his reason to live again. And Lucas, the boy who once believed the world only belonged to the lucky, was now preparing for the first race of his life. Not to prove anything to others, but to say to himself, "I'm ready to run, not to escape, but because I belong on this path." Dawn fell over the small town like a gentle whisper. The first rays of sunlight traced a thin golden line across the window of the red brick house, where Lucas was carefully tying his shoelaces. Beside him, Mr. Thomas stood with arms crossed, his eyes fixed on the boy's every movement. Today was race day. The white race jersey hung loosely on Lucas's slender frame. The words, "Hope County Runners Club," printed over his heart, looked oddly out of place. But Lucas carried something none of the other kids had: a quiet faith forged through every run, every fall, every silent evening shared between two lonely generations. "You're not going to win," Thomas said softly, eyes gazing toward the trail leading into town. "I know," Lucas replied. "Are you scared?" Lucas looked up. The wind tousled his hair. "I'm scared of stopping." Thomas said nothing. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and squeezed gently. That simple gesture, perhaps the most honest thing Thomas had done in his life. The 24th annual Hope County Middle School race turned the school's football field into a bustling event center. Kids of all ages, parents, teachers, fans, holding flags and balloons, crowded under the midday sun. The speakers blared familiar country songs, blending into the joyful chatter of the crowd. Lucas felt out of place, but not alone. He stood with the 12-14 age group, listening to the referee's commands with a calm face. Around him were confident faces, some kids in brand new Adidas, others with personal coaches standing beyond the line. He looked down at his silver shoes. They didn't feel old now. They were part of him, worn through windy afternoons, silent training, and every time he fell and stood up again. The race began. Distance 2,000 meters around the school and through the old neighborhood. The starting gun fired. The kids surged forward like a swarm of bees. Lucas started slower than the rest. No one cheered for him. No one noticed him. But every step, every breath was steady. Just as Thomas had taught him, run to feel yourself, not to be seen by others. Lucas passed the wooden houses, the empty lot where he once trained. He saw the old oak tree where Grandma Mary read the newspaper. The wind was cool. His heartbeat rose but remained steady. Sweat began to form. The path melted into memory. A boy ahead of him slipped and fell. Lucas moved past. Another stopped from a stomach cramp. Lucas kept running, not the fastest, but the steadiest. At the halfway point, Thomas was there. No cheering, no yelling, just a nod. A simple nod that carried the weight of a long journey shared by two souls the world had once forgotten. Lucas didn't finish first. He finished 9th out of 24. No applause, no cameras, no prizes for that place. But as he crossed the finish line, something unexpected happened. A few adults standing nearby clapped quietly. Someone asked, "Who's that kid?" "He's got good technique. Think he's from the village school. Worn out shoes, but tough as nails." Lucas panted, hands on his knees, but he smiled. A smile not for his ranking, but because he didn't give up. From that day on, Lucas was no longer invisible at school. Friends began calling his name. The PE teacher apologized for having underestimated him. And the most surprising of all, a small local sports magazine published a story with the headline, "The Boy with the Silver Shoes, One Pair of Feet, One Heart, One Coach Who Left the Spotlight to Reignite a Dream." Thomas received a letter in the mail. It was from an old friend, once a rival on the Olympic team, now the director of a semi-pro sports academy in Ohio. He had read the article. "Thomas, I thought you'd vanished from the world. But it turns out you were just preparing for another race, this time against time. If there's still fire in you, bring it here. You and that boy." Thomas said nothing after reading the letter. He simply placed it on the table, poured himself a glass of water, and looked out the window where Lucas was running laps on the dirt lot behind the house. The wind blew the boy's hair forward, his footsteps steady like a heartbeat. That summer, the two left the village. Grandma Mary saw them off at the bus station. Lucas hugged her tightly. "I'll come back, I promise. As long as you run with your whole heart, you'll always be the boy I believe in," she whispered, eyes misty. Lucas didn't have much luggage, a few sets of clothes, a notebook filled with running logs, and the silver shoes. Worn but never discarded. He carried them like a vow to never turn back as long as the road lay ahead. Ohio, Semi-Pro Sports Academy. Lucas was the youngest trainee there. The other kids came from wealthy families, had been trained since they could walk with private coaches and special diets. Lucas had only Thomas. But Thomas didn't train him the traditional way. He woke him at 5 a.m., made him breathe atop windy hills, read books on sports psychology. He didn't let Lucas compete right away. Don't enter a race until you know why you want to win. Lucas was angry at first. But then he understood this coach wasn't just teaching him to run. He was teaching him to live. A year later, Lucas competed in the state youth championship. This time he placed third. It was a small race, but for the first time someone offered him a scholarship to a specialized athletic high school. They said if he kept improving, he might make it into college on a full ride. Thomas received a grant to serve as a mental wellness advisor. For the first time in 20 years, he stepped onto a stage, not as an athlete, but as a speaker, sharing his story of failure and rebirth. One afternoon, Lucas asked, if you hadn't fallen that year, who would you be now? Thomas smiled gently, looked at him and said, someone alone with a medal on the wall. But now, I'm someone who helped another win one with his own feet and his own heart. At 16, Lucas joined the national U18 competition. On the entry list, Lucas Walker appeared next to the biggest names in the country. But he wasn't anxious. He laced up a new pair of shoes, his first sponsored pair. But in his bag next to his heart, he still kept the old silver ones. When he stepped onto the track among thousands of spectators, Thomas sat in the third row holding a small sign. Don't need to win, just run true. Lucas ran as if it were the first time he had tasted freedom. And as he crossed the finish line, no matter what place, no matter who stood on the podium, he knew he had won against himself. That night in his dorm room, Lucas opened his bag and took out the old silver shoes. He stared at them for a long time. Then, with a small knife, he carved into the sole, "Run even when the road is rough." 2 souls, 1 old one, young once left behind by the world, but they found each other. And an old pair of shoes, once lifeless, had become a symbol of something far greater: honesty, perseverance, and a dream that never stops running. The early September wind swept in, carrying the crisp scent of fallen leaves and freshly cut wood. Lucas was riding the highest wave of his spirit since the day he first tied his shoelaces on the porch of Mr. Thomas's house. He had placed 3rd in the U18 national competition, earned an athletic scholarship, and attracted attention from several school teams. But more importantly, he felt like he was living a life that truly meant something. He still kept his old habits, waking up early every morning to jog laps around the dormitory courtyard, then eating a breakfast of peanut butter toast, the same one Grandma Mary had taught him as a child. Mr. Thomas remained his primary mentor, though now Lucas also had a technical coach. They made a strange pair, a boy from a forgotten village and an old man who had once been a fallen star. Everything seemed to be following the arc of a perfect American dream. Until the day running no longer felt like freedom. That morning, the sky was overcast. Lucas was doing 400-meter sprints, part of a new speed training regimen from his technical coach. The concrete track was slick from the night's rain, but the session went on as scheduled. Lucas didn't hesitate, for what he feared most wasn't injury, but delay. "Lucas, one more lap," the coach shouted from the bleachers. He nodded, pushing his body into the final sprint. Sweat mixed with rain. His heartbeat pounded like a battle drum. And then, crack. A small sound, but enough to know something had gone wrong. His left knee. A sharp pain like a blade slicing through. Lucas slipped, lost momentum, and crashed hard onto the track, sliding nearly 2 meters before coming to a stop. Everything slowed. Footsteps pounded toward him. Someone called his name. But Lucas couldn't hear clearly anymore. Only the thud of his heartbeat in his ears, and a terrifying emptiness swelling in his chest. In the academy's emergency room, the cold fluorescent lights glared down on his pale face. His knee was wrapped in thick bandages. The heart monitor beeped steadily. Mr. Thomas sat at the foot of the bed, his hand gripping the chair arm so tightly his knuckles turned white. The doctor adjusted his glasses and spoke in a voice as dry as paperwork. "We've confirmed grade 3, medial meniscus tear in the left knee. Surgery is necessary. Recovery time depends on the body's response, but he should forget about competing for at least the next 12 months. Each word struck like a hammer, driving into his dream. Lucas closed his eyes. He didn't cry, but tears still fell, not from pain, but from the feeling of being pushed off the track again. For the next week, Lucas didn't speak to anyone. He lay in bed staring at the blank white ceiling. His silver shoes, now worn and torn, sat silently in his locker like him. Everything he had fought for now hovered in a dark unknown. Mr. Thomas came every day. He brought fruit books, or sometimes nothing at all, just himself. But Lucas wouldn't look at him. One evening, Thomas placed an old photo on the table. It was him in a wheelchair, 1996, staring at a stadium through a hospital window. "I was here too," he said. "I stared at this same ceiling and thought, my life was over." Lucas turned away. "Then you understand," he said. "You understand what it's like to lose everything, just when you're closest to the dream." Thomas was silent for a long time, then finally spoke, "I do. But I made one mistake. I let the dream be buried with my knee. I turned myself into a shadow." Lucas turned back, eyes red. "I don't want to become a shadow." "Then don't," Thomas said, his voice sharp for the first time. "You're alive. You're breathing. You have legs. That means you still have a choice. You can stay down or get back up." Lucas sat quietly for a long time. Then he whispered, "But I don't want you to see this happen again. You lost everything from one fall. I don't want to be the reason you relive it." That sentence was like an invisible blade cutting deep into Thomas's memory. That night he went home and played an old videotape of his final race. The footage was grainy, flickering. But the moment was clear. He collapsed, clutching his knee, eyes filled not just with pain, but betrayal. Betrayed by ambition itself. For the first time in years, Thomas wept. The next morning, Lucas woke up to find something new. On the table beside his bed was a small wooden box. Inside was a handwritten note. "You once said, 'Running makes me feel free.' Then don't let your freedom be trapped within four walls. No one can take your dream from you unless you give it away." Beneath the note were the silver shoes. But they had been restored, stitched back together, and on the side embroidered in red thread, "Fall forward." Lucas picked up the shoes, pressed his head against them, and cried. For the first time, he cried not from defeat, but from being lifted. The recovery began. Physical therapy, strict diets, limits on every movement. Each time he tried to extend his leg, pain flared like fire. But Lucas never quit. Thomas was no longer the coach, he was the companion. Each day he came, no training plans, just a smile. "Hurts like hell. Good. Means you can still feel it. Means you're not dead." They joked. They shared stories. They co-wrote a rehab journal. Some entries read, "Day 9. He walked 7 steps, fell on the 8th, laughed the whole time." Day 31. Kicked a paper ball for the first time. Day 76. He cried after standing on both feet for 60 seconds. Every small victory was celebrated like Olympic gold. 9 months later, Lucas stepped onto the treadmill. He trembled. Sweat soaked his back before he even started. Thomas stood beside him, silent, watching. Lucas turned on the machine. Slow speed. The first steps stiff, uneven. But then, the body remembered. The legs remembered. The heart remembered. At the 5-minute mark, Lucas increased the speed just a little. Not much, but enough to hear the wind, and enough to make his eyes glisten. Lucas wouldn't compete that year. He knew that. But he didn't need to. Because what he had regained wasn't a medal. It was himself. And Thomas, no longer a man trapped in the shadows of failure, had found a way to walk beside a young runner learning how to rise again. That winter, during a speech at the academy, Lucas stood before a crowd and said, "I used to think a pair of shoes could help me run. But the person who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself, that's what gave me real wings. Falling isn't what breaks you. What breaks you is having no one to help you rise. But I'm lucky, because I had him. The spotlight fell on the stage. In the audience, Mr. Thomas wiped his eyes with the sleeve of his coat. Not a word. Just a look proud, radiant, as if he had just finished the greatest race of his life. 18 months after that fall, Lucas Walker stood at the starting line of the National Youth Championship held at the National Stadium in St. Louis. The stands were packed. Thousands of eyes were watching. The vibrant sounds of the crowd filled the air. But inside him, everything was quiet, like the silence before a great storm, like the stillness before a leap, like the way Mr. Thomas had looked at him that morning, not a word, just one slow, deliberate nod. A week earlier, Lucas had received news that Mr. Thomas wouldn't be able to attend the race. The chronic myocarditis he had been quietly battling had flared up severely. Doctors ordered complete rest. A long trip and exposure to loud noise could stop his heart at any moment. Lucas had stood silently outside the hospital room after hearing the news. "I'm sorry," Thomas said softly, struggling to breathe. "This time, I can't be there with you. It's okay." Lucas smiled, placing his hand on Thomas's shoulder. "You don't need to run with me anymore, because you already taught me how." Race day. On the giant screen appeared Lane 6, Lucas Walker, Hope County Runners Club. He was an unfamiliar name in a list of top contenders like Mason Blake and Tony Varela athletes sponsored by major sports brands. But Lucas wasn't here to chase titles. He was here to finish what had been started, not for the world, but for himself. And for the one who believed in him long before he believed in himself. The referee raised the starting pistol. The countdown echoed. The entire stadium held its breath. Bang! Lucas surged forward like an arrow, powerful strides, deep, even breaths. The track seemed to shrink before him. It was no longer just 400 or 800 meters. It was the 6-year path he'd taken from the boy in cracked plastic sandals running village roads to the athlete now wearing official race shoes, carrying the hopes of a quiet community. He remembered every face: Grandma Mary sitting on the porch, reading eyes worried about unpaid bills. Mr. Thomas Stern, wounded like a man carrying an unstitched scar. He remembered the first time he wore the silver shoes. How perfectly they fit, not just on his feet, but in his heart. He remembered the first rain Mr. Thomas made him run through. The fall that nearly broke him. The moment he rose again, not to prove anything, but to not be swallowed by fear. Final lap. Lucas was in third place. His body burned, legs fatigued, but his mind stayed sharp. Ahead were Mason and Tony elite runners. They accelerated. But Lucas didn't panic. "You don't need to win," Thomas had said. "You just need to run true." He adjusted his breathing, loosened his shoulders, eyes on the track, not the others. Just one finish line, one reason, one more step. When Lucas pushed into second place, the crowd exploded. His name blared from the speakers, but he barely heard it, because in that moment inside him was the image of Mr. Thomas standing in that old field, the evening sun casting shadows across his solemn face. Was the silver shoes he still kept in his locker, stitched with red thread, fall forward. Was Grandma Mary's voice on a quiet night. "Run, my child. Don't worry if the world doesn't see you. Just don't leave yourself behind." Lucas crossed the finish line. Second place, not first. But it was the greatest race of his life. He dropped to his knees not from exhaustion, but because he knew he had just completed something that an entire generation before him never got to finish. At that exact moment, 300 miles away in a hospital room, Mr. Thomas lay in bed watching the race on a small TV. As Lucas crossed the line, Thomas nodded one last time and smiled. His heart slowed. Doctors rushed in. But Thomas kept his eyes on the screen. There were no tears, only perfect peace. 2 weeks later, Thomas's funeral was held in Hope County. No brass bands, no flags draped over coffins, just a black and white photo of him in his youth holding up a medal under the sun. And one speaker, Lucas Walker. Before the small village crowd, Lucas said he was once forgotten. But he didn't let bitterness bury the best part of himself. He passed it on to me not as a gift, but as a reminder. Dreams aren't just things to reach. Dreams are something to live in every step. And he lived with everything a person can possibly give. That night, Lucas returned to the red brick house at the village's edge where everything began. It looked just the same, the red roof, the faded flag, the old oak tree in the back. In the attic, he found a wooden box Thomas had left behind. Inside were the old silver shoes. Still torn on the side, the reflective layer faded. And a letter. Lucas, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer around. But don't be sad. Those who truly love you never really leave. They just move from outside to inside you. I was never the best coach. But I tried my best not to kill someone's hope again the way the world once killed mine. These shoes were once mine. Then they were yours. Now they belong to no one. They're a symbol of this truth. No matter where you start, if you don't stop running, you've already won. Keep running, Lucas. Run until you no longer need to prove anything to anyone, not even yourself. With love, Thomas. Lucas held the silver shoes for a long time. Then he tied the laces together and hung them from the old oak tree behind the house. When the wind passed through the shoes, swung gently, letting out a soft sound like a distant heartbeat. 1 year later, Lucas became the youngest ambassador of the Running Forward program, a nonprofit supporting underprivileged children with a passion for sports in rural America. He visited small schools sharing the story of Thomas and his own journey. And every time he stood before hundreds of students, he ended with one question. It doesn't matter what you're wearing, designer sneakers or bare feet. What matters is, do you have the courage to run, and are you brave enough to fall forward?